there is a sequence of steps that we can follow to carry out a design project. And what we are referring to is the design process. And in this video, we are going to discover an overview of different stages of the design process. And each designer has their own way of going through this design process, but I kind of broke this down into 3 main stages. And what we are talking about is really carrying out a project from the very beginning to its completion and following these stages or steps so that it keeps us organized and guides us through the process. And one of the first stages that we want to think about is what's called the information gathering stage. And this is where we want to find out about the design project itself and collect as much information as we can so we have everything we need to solve a design problem. And this is the stage where we're thinking about where and what and who and why. But we're not thinking yet about how, which would be how we are going to approach this design project or solve a design problem. And when we say problem in this sort of process, this is a really positive thing because lots of times problem can be a very negative thing. But in the design process, this is a challenge. This is how we approach design because we see it as a problem that we need to solve. But in this first stage, we want to just gather some information to find out what we're going to be working on. And one of the first things a designer would do is just to check in with the client and find out what they need help with and what the project is going to be. We want to find out a client's expectations or their goals, what their vision is for a design project. And we are there to ask questions and get some feedback and clarify things. And if you are doing this on your own, you are also thinking about what the design project is going to be, what the scope is of the project, which rooms you're going to be working on, or just one room. And it's really thinking about what you want to have this design project be all about. And part of this would be to maybe sum up what the design project or the design problem is. And this is what we would call a problem statement. So creating a statement or phrase that describes the design problem. This would be where the designer would sum up the scope of the project, expectations of the project, goals, and of course any budget or timeline or anything else that's important to the client. And this is where you could do this as well, just to create a statement that defines what you want to work on. And then the next part of this stage would be information gathering. This is where we want to collect as much information about this design problem, about this design project, as much as possible. And sometimes this part of the design process is what's referred to as programming, which just means we are collecting as much information as possible about the design problem so that it guides us to provide a solution to this design problem. The designer will want to gather information about the client as well as about where they live. And with their client, they'll want to find out who lives there and what are their interests, what is their personal style, maybe what their design style is, what's important to them, what are their dislikes or things that they really like, what's working now or what's not working, what's really important to them, and really maybe digging deeper into their budget or if they have a specific timeline in mind. And the designer will want to collect information about where their client lives. Maybe they'll need to gather really accurate measurements of a room. Or maybe they'll want to find out how much natural lighting is coming into a room. And this is where the designer would also listen and ask questions and clarify things with their client and get feedback that they are on the right track and kind of summarize what the client is looking for to make sure that they are on the same page. They'll want to find out as much information as possible that will be really useful when they want to figure out how to approach this project. And if you were doing this on your own, you would do the same thing. You would ask yourself questions of, what are your goals and vision for a space or for your home? What are things you like or don't like? Or what are things that are really important to you? You'd also want to think about your budget, and you will also maybe need to take measurements. And maybe at this time, you may even want to start looking at different things that inspire you, collecting images of rooms or furniture styles or anything else that helps you to organize your thoughts and organize things so that you have a good idea of what you want to do and what your goals are for your home. And then all of this information that we're collecting would need to be organized in a way so that we can easily reference all of this information. And also part of this process would be to create maybe accurate floor plan representations of maybe a room that they are working on. So they have everything in place that has the most accurate assessment of what's going on for this project. And for you, you would want to do the same thing. You would want to organize all the information that you have, making a list of everything. And if you took measurements of your room, maybe you'd want to do a quick sketch on graph paper just to represent the actual scale and size of that space. Then when we have all this information, we can move on to the next stage, which is design development. So this is where we would want to start to look at how we're going to solve this design problem. And we would start out with preliminary designs, preliminary concepts, and go all the way through this process to get down to a final design. So the first part of this stage is really analyzing the information that we have so far. A designer may want to look at common themes or patterns that are happening in this client's home. They may also want to take note of really important things that the client was very adamant about certain dislikes or likes or things that they really need. And they will just start to analyze and organize all of this information. And during this first part of the design development, the designer may want to revise that problem statement because now they have even more information. So they may want to summarize the design problem with more details. They may also want to start to have a visual summary of this design problem. Maybe they will bring out different colors that the client really wants to work with. So they have a visual way of seeing that design problem. And this is where you can do this too, where you can take a look at all the information that you collected and think about everything that you want and envision for this space, and to kind of think about revising your problem statement so that you have a better idea of what the design problem is. And this is where you may want to also summarize it visually by collecting materials and colors and things like that. That will provide a visual way of you to look at your design project. And when we've taken some time to kind of analyze everything and have a better idea of what the design problem is and what we're working with, then designers will start to develop different design concepts, and they'll brainstorm ideas and just work on different things that they can think of how to approach this design project. They may create sketches, which are referred to as schematics. So maybe rough sort of furniture layouts or a rough sketch of a cabinet that they would like to design. Just anything that starts to build on and develop a design concept. They'll probably start to look at different vendors where they can source different types of furnishings, and they'll start to get some budgets, maybe even some rough estimates from contractors, so they can kind of get an idea of some initial costs for everything. And they'll just start to kind of gather all of these things. They'll take time to review some different design concepts that they've come up with. What will happen is maybe narrowing it down to one or two different design approaches or design concepts. And part of that process would be creating what's called a design statement. This is where they would create a phrase, a sentence that would summarize their approach to solving this design problem for each of the design concepts that they create. And they would create what we could refer to as deliverables. So things that they would use to present to the client, so the client gets an understanding of their approach, their design concepts for this project. They may create a mood board or maybe some quick preliminary floor plans of a furniture layout. And they may have some other documentation on estimates for a budget or ideas and estimates for contractors who may carry out some of this work. And they would also want to provide some sort of estimate to the client on a timeline of when to expect everything could begin. And when they meet with their client, this is where they would want to listen to what the client is telling them and getting their feedback and clarifying their expectations and goals and finding out what's resonating with them and what they don't like and seeing if there's anything that needs to be adjusted. And this is where you would go through a similar process where you would want to develop different ideas or different design concepts for your design project. In fact, I would challenge you to come up with two different options, two different design concepts, and to come up with a mood board that would visually bring everything together and give you an idea of how everything will look and feel. And then also take a look at your budget and research different types of furnishings and working with a contractor and how much all of that is going to cost. And then take some time to live with each of those design concepts and see if there's one that maybe works better for you, or see if you can combine both of them to create an even better design. And a designer, after meeting with their client, will then go back and make some adjustments to their design, and then also go back and communicate these new updates with their client. And when everything is finalized through the client's perspective, this is where things can become more finalized. This is where that initial preliminary design concept can become a new finalized design solution to your client's original design problem. And this is where a designer may also provide an agreement or a contract with the client for them to sign off on this approach to the design project. And the last part of this design development phase really is finalizing everything. And this is where the designer would really finalize the list of any furnishings or anything that they will be ordering, specifying exact details of the sizes and the finishes and anything else, and sourcing vendors who they will be ordering all of these items through. They may be also looking to finalize any sort of layout drawings or a floor plan, or finalizing details if they are working with maybe a cabinet maker. And also, this is where they may be working with a client's contractor, where they will be finalizing the scheduling and the timeline of everything, and of course, all of the budgets. And this is where you would want to finalize your list of everything that you need to order. And you may even want to finalize any agreements that you would have with contractors. So after we have gone through this process of the design development stage, we can move into the third stage, which I kind of refer to as the implementation stage. And this is where we are starting to order materials and starting to install things, and construction is taking place all the way through to completion. As a designer, this is where they would begin to order materials and work with their vendors on timelines and schedules of when things can be delivered. This is where they would stay in contact with their client about scheduling and timelines, and staying in contact with the contractor about their timelines and scheduling. And then on your own, you would start to order everything that you need to order. Maybe this is a time where you can look for sales, maybe on certain items, and then also start to keep track of when things will be delivered, and staying in contact with any contractors that you have an agreement with on where they are in their process, and get an idea of the scheduling and the timeline for your design project. And the next part of this stage is the construction or installation phase. And depending on the project, there will be a sequence of steps or a sequence of phases of when certain things are installed. And the designer's job is to go to the home and check on the progress of everything. They're also just keeping track of any orders that they've placed, and if they've been delivered, and when they can be delivered to the client's home. And they're staying in communication with their client and the contractor just during all of these different installation phases of the project. And it's really just making sure that everything is following this design plan for this project. And if we need to address anything, that it's done at that time and changes can be made. And this is where you would keep track of anything that you ordered and when they can be installed, and working with your contractors and kind of checking on making sure that the correct materials are there, or that everything is going as planned. And the last part of this stage is what we could refer to as the evaluation stage. This is where everything is installed and everything's almost ready to go, but we want to make sure that everything is just right. And this is where the designer would walk through with the client to make sure that every detail has been covered, and walk through with the contractor to do the same. In fact, a contractor may walk through with the client and the designer and create what's called a punch list, a list of things that need to be changed or addressed before we can button up everything and call this project complete. And this is where the designer would do some last minute touch-up styling. So maybe adjusting the throw pillows on the sofa, or making sure a picture is hung straight. But most importantly, they would be there with the client to make sure the client is very happy with how everything turned out. And you would do the same. You would want to walk through your home or the room you're working on with the contractors that you hired, so that everything looks just right. And if there are any little touch-ups that need to be made, that they would take care of those right away so that you are happy with the results. So please let me know if you have any questions about this design process, this kind of framework that we can use to take us from the very beginning of a design project all the way to its completion. Thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time when we will discover more interior design. Take care.